In 2005, when the city of New Orleans was in a dire state of emergency from Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath, thousands of National Guard members were sent there to help with rescue and relief at the request of the state's governor at the time. And while people were really happy to get federal help, it was also obviously something new and scary to have military troops on their streets. And there was this memorable scene captured in Spike Lee's documentary about Katrina, where the lieutenant general in charge of the military efforts on the ground told his troops to make sure to put their weapons down.
Weapons down! Weapons down, damn it! Put those damn weapons down! I'm gonna play your game, goddammit! Get those goddamn weapons down!
That man, the now retired Lieutenant General Russell Honoré, is going to join me in a moment. But the important point here is, here was a military leader who understood the proper role of America's armed forces. They are not there to police civilians. That's not what the U.S. military does. They are there to protect and to help them. The difference now is that people like Lieutenant General Russell Honoré have been purged from a lot of the upper ranks so that Donald Trump can try to convert the military into a partisan tool, mobilizing the National Guard and even the Marines against peaceful protesters. This is all being overseen by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, a loyalist, former weekend morning cable news host, who has less qualifications for his current job than anyone with that title in decades, possibly ever. Retired Lieutenant General Russell Honoré is the former commander of Joint Task Force Katrina, which was responsible for coordinating military relief efforts after the hurricane in 2005, and he joins me now. Lieutenant General, it's great to have you on, and you have a unique perspective to share here as someone who had that experience in New Orleans. What are your concerns, worries? What are you thinking about this deployment of the National Guard over the governor's objections and the deployment of 700 U.S. Marines to Los Angeles?
I think it's not normal. Initially, it didn't look illegal because they were going to protect federal property, but the protocols were not followed. I mean, you're going to mobilize the governor's National Guard. The first person you speak to is the governor, and you make sure he's got an alignment with that. If you're going to mobilize them in Title 10 to send them overseas, or if there was a discussion with the governor and encouraged the governor for the governor to mobilize the National Guard, well, it would have been a better way to do this. But the fact that the president jumped the gun on the governor on Saturday when he reached into California without consultation with the governor, by all reports, and mobilized 2,000 of his National Guard. Then simultaneously, the Pentagon put 700 Marines, initially 500 Marines, on prepared to deploy order for Pimpton. And none of that made sense because the Marines, I know that it didn't have the equipment and they were not trained to do this type of civil disturbance. They are trained to do direct combat, run on beaches and run uphill and do it very well. But this is not a primary mission, whereas the National Guard are required, the infantry brigades, to have annual training on civil disturbance. Mm-hmm. But when he mobilized 2,000, I knew damn well they didn't have 2,000 kits of riot control equipment because the Guard managed that equipment and they sent it around as needed to the different states. So I think the president jumped the gun, and as opposed to de-escalating, I think it may have escalated the events. And the California Police Department, which consists of 117,000 police in California, I think has its situation under control.
Yeah, that point you said about training strikes me as important. We were showing that B-roll, and if I'm not mistaken, I want to, if someone in the control room correctly or I'm wrong, I think that B-roll was showing some of those U.S. Marines who are now being trained in, civil disturbance work. This reporting from NBC News says the deployment is fueling concern the Marines have not been properly trained for interacting with civilians, including children, during potentially tense law enforcement operations. And to my understanding, they actually aren't deployed out there yet, which sort of raises the point of, is it all worth the $134 million and a bunch of National Guardsmen who may not get paid, as far as we can tell, according to early reporting? Is this all worth it to be using the military in this way?
Well, first of all, the Guard will get paid. And number two, the Marines, the way we do it in the Army, if you mobilize a brigade and they need training, we send a detachment from the military police school for Lindenwood, and they go out and they do a quick training regiment for the troops in counter-protest activities. I assume that's who the Marines lean to come out and bring a attack team out to help them. But again, they're well organized and get the resource. But the experts in America on proud of protests is the big police departments like Los Angeles, New York. They're the experts on counter-protest operations. So I wish them well.
That footage was National Guard. I should just make a quick correction on this. I want to ask you also about the scene that we saw at Fort Bragg, I believe it was yesterday, in which the president appearing before a bunch of uniformed soldiers. You know, we have subsequent reporting that they screened those soldiers to make sure that they agreed with the president politically. They told people that didn't agree with him to make sure they were not there, also for fitness level. And the president gave a very partisan speech. You've got, you know, active duty uniformed soldiers booing the mayor of California. What did you think of that scene?
Not much. I was embarrassed. It was an inappropriate speech. And in my 37 years in uniform, I had never seen some SHIT like this happen in real life. And it happened on live TV with the biggest voice in America, the most powerful man in the world, standing before troops and taking advantage of their emotions.
And separate. There's an important role soldiers have and are taught to stay out of politics and be loyal to the Constitution, not a person or a party. Do these actions by the president, in your opinion, blur that line? And if so, what are the potential consequences?
Well, I think the underlying principle, both constitutional and sort of the values of America, is we don't want the U.S. Armed Forces involved in domestic law enforcement, period. We don't want them investigating, arresting, gathering evidence. That's the heart and soul of the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, at the same time, a lot of Americans don't understand. 1976, the Presidential Emergency Powers Act, there's some 137 emergency powers granted to the president that he can act on without congressional approval. There's 30 ongoing declared national emergencies that are staying in place. And so certainly, in my view, he has full authority to carry out military operations, for example, to protect federal property. But much of this is political theater. Obviously, the LAPD, a first-rate law enforcement organization, the LA County Sheriff's Department have more than enough manpower to handle the situation. But again, Christina, in the background, are we going to allow the Trump administration to deport 10 million people? Can they even do it? Can they do it with due process in the court system? The answer is no. But this, I think, from a political perspective, is what both President Trump wants and Gavin Newsom here daring federal authorities to arrest him. There's a certain element of political immaturity and risk.
Let's bring in retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling now. General, the president heading to Fort Bragg today for this Army celebration as he is deploying hundreds of Marines and thousands of National Guard troops to California. What do you make of the optics?
Well, the optics is a different subject, Anna. What I'd say is it's not unusual for a Secretary of Defense or a president to visit a troop location. Fort Bragg is one of two of the largest U.S. Army facilities in the world. And what we have to do is take a look at what are they doing there. This is the run-up to the Army's birthday, the 250th. I'll point out that the Army was established 1 year before the country was established with the Declaration of Independence. So it is a big deal, and there's a lot of things going on at Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg is also the home of the 82nd Airborne Forces Command. There's quite a few special operations commands at that base. It's the 82nd Airborne is there, as well as the 18th Airborne Corps. So it is a large post with a lot of family members, and they're celebrating all this week. What I'm concerned about is what will be the messaging that the president gives at that post. If it's just a grip and grin with the soldiers and the family members, that's great. That's normal and typical. What I'm concerned about is, will there be any indications, given that the 18th Airborne Corps is the rapid reaction corps for the United States Army, that they might be going somewhere else, especially inside of the country, to contribute to the kind of things like the Marines were just called up to do. That's not a typical 18th Airborne Corps mission, but they can do it. And they have different units that are scheduled to be out of Fort Bragg within 1 day, within 2 days, and within 3 days as a roll-up. So they can quickly deploy, and they're trained to do those kind of things. So that's what I'm watching for, is what kind of messaging is the president going to give, along with Secretary of Defense Hegseth, as well as Secretary of the Army Driscoll, who's also going to be there.
Well, and I have to think that Secretary Hegseth will face questions at some point today about future plans to deploy other military personnel to other places in the country should more protests break out. And is this just setting the stage for a new normal, quote unquote? I know you've been watching what's happening in Los Angeles. What are your biggest concerns there right now?
Well, again, a couple of big concerns. The coordination of U.S. military forces, both National Guard and Marines under U.S. Northern Command, who has to coordinate with the local civilian authorities. With a fast deployment like that, it's not so much the deployment. The military can do those kinds of things very quickly. It's what happens after. It's like a parachutist jumping out of an airplane. It's great that they can do that jump, but what do they do when they get on the ground? That's the critical part right now. And when you're talking about support for civilian authorities, which is the mission that the National Guard gives, that means they guard things. They support other governmental agencies so that they can execute their duties, not the military. So the National Guard should be taking over things like building fences or putting up barricades or guarding key facilities. I'm not sure what the Marines are involved in here, because that's a combat force. They don't train on support for civilian authorities. Units can quickly gear up for it, but it's not something they're used to. So what I'm concerned about is if the president finds a way to declare the Insurrection Act, which I think would be very inappropriate given what we've seen. An Insurrection Act means someone's
getting a rude awakening from the military, right? His plan is not being well received. And again, usually retired military people don't spend a lot of time criticizing current presidents. Usually when people retire from the military, they retire. They might go work in the private sector. There's a lot of issues, of course, with former military people going to work with, like weapon companies and doing all sorts of shady things like that. But often when they comment on them, they comment on like strategy, like some war will be happening. And it's like, well, when I was a general, we did this and that, and here's what I would be, those sorts of things, right? It's rare they come on and criticize the policy and conduct of a sitting president. Because regardless of their views, because, these men all have their private views, I'm guessing some of them they're probably more likely to be Republican than Democrat, all things being equal. They feel a need to speak out against Trump because his actions are irresponsible, they are immoral, they are divisive, they are inflammatory, and this is a debate, but they may be illegal. And so these generals are coming out and saying, this is not how a proper commander-in-chief operates the military, right? Because remember, people forget this, the president is the commander-in-chief. Trump abuses and inflates his ego and his power a lot, but he is right when he says, like, I am basically the head of the military. But with that power comes responsibility. And generals from across the political spectrum speaking out, that's a rude awakening.